everyone, it is Devah Koure, and I am back again with another podcast. It's awesome to be here. I took a few weeks off. One of them was for Labor Day, and I figured nobody wanted to watch a podcast about spirituality while they were at people's backyard barbecues and stuff. But otherwise, I took a couple of weeks off for personal reasons as I've been kind of going through a personal journey. So I am here, I'm back, and I'm ready to kind of get started in this new direction of non-duality and Christianity. Hold on. Oh. Every now and then I wish there was somebody else recording with me, so I would have time to go on mute and cough or drink water. But this is all me, so you guys get to see it live as it is. But luckily I do have a mute button, so you don't actually have to hear the coughing. I am going to drink some water though. Let me know if you're here. Let me know that you can hear me. Let me know, that we're ready to get started. So I'm kind of shifting some things for myself. I have been on a spiritual journey for the last 3 years, actually. It's been about 3 years since I had a spiritual awakening, now that I realize that. What's called in some traditions as a Kundalini awakening. And it's been an interesting journey as I've been learning more about what that is and what that means for me and what that means of my role in this world. And so I have been, just kind of like working through what that is. And the last couple of weeks have really shifted a lot of things for me. I pulled a tarot card at one point that, kind of gave me a pull to find a more traditional practice. And so up until this point, I had a very kind of eclectic practice, just kind of pulling in what worked for me, meditating on a fairly regular basis, doing my own personal work, reading a lot of books. You could say I got the Bhagavad Gita behind me. I've got Hanuman. I've got all kinds of things, right? And, reading a lot of books and finding out what works for me through that process. And what I found as part of that was that, at some point it becomes a little limiting to not have the community of people who are growing next to you, who are growing with you at the same time. It becomes a little limiting in your own personal growth because you don't necessarily have those mirror reflections from other people, right? I talk about that often in terms of relationships. Relationships are a mirror reflection for our own personal growth, and you don't necessarily have those reflections from other people in order to kind of continue to grow, in order to push you, in order to expose you to new things that you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. And I got this tarot card about, finding a more traditional practice. And so I took it seriously. And I decided to try to find one that works for me. And initially, so my background, my bias has been, prior to my spiritual awakening, was at most agnostic, right? I was very into rationalism, very into logic, very into science. And that was kind of my own personal bias. And my bias was honestly against Christianity, to be quite frank. And so in acting from that, kind of place of bias, that filter, the first thing that I, attempted to do was to find a non-Christian practice. And so I was looking at Zen Buddhism, and I looked at Advaita Vedanta, a form of Hinduism, Which, by the way, if Christianity is not for you and you are looking for a traditional practice, you could do a lot worse than Advaita Vedanta. It's pretty freaking great. There's a lot of good aspects of it. But I was looking at those. I was, looking at Taoism, and in the past, I probably would have described myself closest to a Taoist more than anything else. And I was looking at the traditional practices related to those, spirituality areas. And they all are kind of non-dualist. So non-duality is basically that, we believe that we're all one. That we're all one with Source, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. That we're all one with each other, that we're one with the earth, that we're one with the rocks outside, that we're one with, the clouds and the sky. Non-duality is this concept that everything is one, that there is nothing that is in fact separate. And so I was looking at a lot of these non-dual practices because that is a core part of my belief system, a core part of who I am and what I believe and what I practice. And for me, what I found with those systems was that there was a lot of logic, a lot of science. It's like the logic or the science of spiritual enlightenment, right? They kind of lead you to a place of being enlightened through, specific acts or methodologies that can get you there. And it lacked something for me. It lacked something for me at this stage in my life. And what it really lacked was the heart, right? It was all in the brain. It was all up here. It wasn't really down here. It lacked this feeling of, even though unconditional love there exists, because it's all non-dual and it's all about unconditional love, it lacked the feeling of reverence and surrender to unconditional love. It lacked the closeness that I felt with God in my own personal practice, the devotion that I feel toward oneness and my own personal practice. And that devotion, I need to be clear, it's not me being devoted to something separate that's outside of me. It's me being devoted to the oneness that exists within all of us. It creates unconditional love for my fellow human. Right? It creates unconditional love for my cat. It creates unconditional love for anything. And in having that sense of unconditional love, right, it's allowed me to really have compassion and love for myself and the experiences that I've had and the trauma that I've experienced, the healing that I needed to go through, the emotional integration that I needed to do. A lot of that can't easily be done without that feeling of complete love and acceptance, right? At least in my personal experience. I'm sure, a lot of people probably can do it. But for me, that was a key part of all of this, is the complete love and acceptance. And so, I kind of went to all of these practices and tried to, see what was right for me. And I realized that what was missing was this love thing. And I had found this love in the work of Christian mystics. And so Christian mysticism is a type of Christianity. I define it as a type of Christianity in which the Christian has had some kind of spiritual awakening or some type of spiritual enlightenment and acts from that place. They teach from that place or they write from that place. And you'll see it in the works of Meister Eckhart. You'll see it in the works of Teresa Avila. You'll see it in the works of Thomas Merton. I definitely recommend reading Thomas Merton if you guys are interested in understanding any of this. His book, No Man is an Island, is something that I am reading and thoroughly enjoying. And it is, it's just highly contemplative, but it's recent, it's modern, and so it's not baked in kind of this old English and you're trying to tease out, what it means in more modern language. It's very down to earth, it's very welcoming, it's very accepting, it's very loving. And so I had found this type of unconditional love, this devotion in the Christian practices. And so for me, what I realized after kind of going through and sitting in these other places and really trying to understand if those are practices that, that I would like to integrate, I realized that in fact it's probably Christianity that I need to integrate. The thing that I was pushing away the most is the thing that I needed to go to. And that's really how it works, with the universe. It's like if you're really listening and you're really open, it's often the thing that we push away the most, the thing that we avoid the most is the thing that we need to go to, the thing that we need to work toward. And so I did just that. I decided to embrace Christianity. And I went to a church. I had a friend of mine who recommended this very progressive, very LGBTQ friendly church. I would recommend it for other people who are, traditional Christian, but want something that's a little bit more progressive, want something that's a little bit more open and more into the social justice type activity. However, what I struggled with in going there was realizing this idea of separation, this idea of duality rather than non-duality. Everything was duality, right? So it's the person and then there's God, and then there's the person and then there's Jesus. And the Christian tradition, the Christian teachings that are not done by the Christian mystics, they tend to be of the kind that make the person who's being taught, that make the person who's reading them feel less than, feel humbled in the face of God, feel like they have to adhere to some standard in order to be loved, in order to be favored. And that's not the unconditional love that I'm going for. That's not the unconditional love that I seek, right? I seek and practice an unconditional love of equality. And so I realized fairly quickly that that wasn't right for me. And as I was talking to my friend who had invited me to it about it, I realized, well, maybe I should start my own church, right? A church of Nondual Christianity, a church that combines really the best of both worlds, that combines the heart of Christianity, because there's so much love there, right? Like Jesus was pure love, absolutely pure and complete unconditional love for humanity. If you go and you find the actual teachings, the actual sayings of him from the Nag Hammadi library, and not just the stuff that was in the Bible, because we know, that people manipulated the Bible, people changed what it said. If we go and find the actual teachings, they are just teachings of pure love, of pure unconditional love and surrender. Devotion to the fellow human, devotion to everyone and everything around him. And that was the practice that I wanted to have, right? The practice of that combined with the recognition that we're all one, that we're all one with Jesus, that we're all one with God, that you and I are all God sitting here making this podcast together, right? I'm speaking, you're listening, hopefully commenting and asking questions, right? And so this combination of non-duality and Christianity was the place where I needed to go, where I absolutely wanted to go. And one of the things that I noticed in that Christian church that I also notice in a lot of non-dual traditions, such as Buddhism and Hinduism, is a lack of personal responsibility. And so I'll explain why I see that lack in both traditions. In the various non-dual traditions, a lot of what they are about is meditating as a means of spiritual enlightenment. And the traditions, not all of them, and I'm going to specifically call out Advaita Vedanta, again, is a really good one to go to because it does practice personal responsibility. But a lot of them otherwise, use meditation as a means of escaping their role in the world and their role to their fellow human. meditation is not a means of personal growth. Meditation is not used to heal trauma. It's not used for emotional integration in a lot of those practices. A lot of times meditation is just used to get to this observer level so you could see that trauma and the emotions don't matter, that you're above them, that you're God, so what you experienced doesn't matter. My issue with that, right, is that we are incarnated on earth for a reason. We're incarnated into a physical body and a physical experience. And we are here with the experiences that we chose as a soul to go through, to understand, to seek healing from, to work to define ourselves in context of those things that have happened to us, right? So I think I've mentioned a few times that I was, really abused as a child. And as part of my spiritual work, one of the things that I had to do was not just forgive everybody that abused me, but also love everyone that abused me. And so in context of the abuse that I was born into, in context of that, finding unconditional love for those people means that I can find unconditional love and acceptance for everyone. Rather than just meditating away from it, rather than just escaping it and not going deep into understanding what that experience was and what it was here for me for and what I learned from it and the person that I've become because of that experience. Rather than avoiding all of that, I go deep into it. And I choose to understand it more. And I choose to experience unconditional love and acceptance as part of that, in context of that abuse experience, in context of that childhood. One of the things that you will see in a lot of non-duality practices in, Buddhism and in parts of Hinduism is that you will see this concept of karma. I'm going to drink some water. Excuse me. You will see this concept of karma. This concept of karma as punishment, right? For living a poor life the previous life, or as reward for living a good life in the previous life. It's this concept that integrates reincarnation, which we know through scientific work, by the way, that reincarnation does exist, right? There are studies that really point very much to the existence of reincarnation. And these non-dual practices integrate the concept of reincarnation, but they integrate it with this concept of karma. And this idea that, if you're a bad person, you'll be born again as a slug in the next life, or be born again as a person in a lower caste, or whatever the case is. And if you're a good person, then you're going to be born again in a higher caste, right? And when you combine that with the meditative practice of escaping, when you combine karma, that concept of karma, with the meditative practice of, escaping your reality and escaping, how you were born, what you end up getting is a sense that you don't need to care about your fellow human, and that you don't need to work on yourself. You just need to be above everything so you can keep moving up and up and up. And those people who, are not in the same caste as you, that are in a lower caste than you, then they're clearly not working on themselves, or clearly not trying to go above and up and up and up, right? And so there's a lot of problems, in my opinion, with that practice. There's a lot of concerns there. But then on the other hand, you have Christianity, and you have this concept of original sin, right? That we are born evil, that we cannot possibly have through intrinsic internal motivation, the idea of being our best selves, that we have to have something outside of us, this concept of heaven and hell. We have to have something outside of us to motivate us to be good people. And some of the best people I know are atheists, man. Atheists can be just really incredible, beautiful people. So that's not true, right? We don't actually have to have something outside of ourselves to make us be good people. We're not born inherently flawed. We are born inherently perfect, inherently worthy. And when you look at what original sin does, and the reason why it was created by the church, it was created as a means of control. Because if you can make people feel less than, if you can make them feel unworthy, and then you can give them the path to worthiness is by going to church, then they're going to go, right? They're going to think that this is their path to worthiness. And so there's a lot that's wrong with Christianity too. But where Christians get something right is they see and they witness the world. They see and they witness the physical world around them. They don't try to escape it. They don't try to escape it at all. And that's a beautiful thing. It's absolutely a beautiful thing. It's really in the teachings of Christ, right? It's really what that gives us. If we're meant to emulate Jesus, what is the phrase that people wear on their bracelets? What would Jesus do, right? If we're meant to emulate Jesus, then really seeing and witnessing the world and being there for our fellow human is the pinnacle of that. That's really what that is, right? The thing is one of the best things that we can do for our fellow human, one of the best things that we can do for the world is to work on ourselves, is to work on our unconscious biases, to work on our emotional integration, to have personal responsibility for our own growth and our own personal evolution. And the only way that we can do that, right? The only way we can do that is by making the conscious choice to do so. It's not outside of ourselves to do that work. It is only inside of ourselves to understand, meditation is helpful because it gets us to the role of the observer so we can see why, yes, I am having an unconscious emotional trigger right now, and I need to understand that. And I need to really go through that and work on that and figure out where that's coming from. But meditation is not an escape, right? Meditation is not the way of doing the emotional integration and the way of healing the trauma. You can do it through meditation, but you have to do it with the intention of actually going through the process of healing. So we're not able to escape it. And we're not able to escape it in the Bible either. You know, a lot of what I saw in that church was people saying, I'm not strong enough to deal with these issues that are in my life, and that I need strength from this external source. And look, we're all one. You have it. You have the strength within you. You have the strength of God. You have the divinity of God already inside of you, right? To deal with what you need to deal with. Christianity keeps us from finding and claiming that power for ourselves. It keeps us from claiming our personal sovereignty. And so when we find that personal sovereignty and we claim our power, then we're able to do that emotional integration work. We're able to heal ourselves. We're able to work through our trauma. We're able to say, okay, now is the time I'd like to go to a psychologist or a pastor or read a book or whatever the case is. Now is the time that I'd like to process this and understand this, so it no longer controls me and it no longer controls my life. And I think that's a big part of what we see lacking in both of those traditions, right? And it's a big part of what I'd like to bring into the world as part of my practice and part of what I will be teaching. And so that's a lot of what this is about. So going forward, this podcast, and I also have a corresponding local to Sacramento meetup group if anybody happens to be in Sacramento. Going forward, this podcast and that meetup group, are really going to be about this. They're really going to be about this path of personal and collective responsibility. They will have some quotes, from various types of religions that are out there, various bases, because there's a lot of truth, there's a lot of depth there in those traditions and those practices, But there's not going to be any hellfire, any brimstone. Sin is not going to be a big thing that's brought up. Karma is not going to be a big thing that's brought up. If we are feeling guilty about something, if we feel like we have karma to resolve, right, that is a catalyst for our own personal growth. That is something that we can address. You know, maybe there's a person that we need to make things right with. Maybe that person is ourselves that we need to make things right with. But there's no punishment for it unless you wish for there to be. The only punishment is that which you're making for yourself. I give an example. God, I was stupid and young. Something I did soon after I started driving is I was pulling into a parking space and accidentally scraped, a car next to me. And I looked at the car and it was super beat up. They wouldn't have noticed the scrape, and so I just kind of went inside and didn't really think anything about it. But it kept eating at me. It kept eating at me for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then one day I come out to my car in a parking lot and there was a big old dent in the side. And I was like, well, there's karma for you. But what that actually was my own guilt, how that ate at me for so many weeks and weeks. And the only way that I could resolve that is by having something happen to me. Right? And that's what karma is. It's our own punishment that we create for ourselves. And this isn't a get out of jail free card. This isn't like, hey, you can be a bad person and just don't feel guilty about it and then you're good. Right? Because the point is that you incarnate on earth for a reason. You incarnate on here to learn things about yourself, to decide things about yourself, to choose who you are and who you wish to be. And unless you really wish to be a jerk, maybe you do, I don't know. But unless you really wish to be a jerk, the point is to live the life that you find value in, that you find peace in, that you find that makes sense for you, that feels aligned with who you are. All right, I'm going to drink some water. Thank you guys for hanging out with me for so long so far. So, I want to talk just a little bit more about personal responsibility and our roles in it. And I have a couple of quotes here because I said I was going to have quotes, so now I have quotes. In the Wisdom of Solomon, which I believe is a Jewish mystic traditional book, it says, for God loves nothing so much as the person who lives with wisdom. Right? And then you have another quote came to me, and it was Thoreau. And he said, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. And one of the things that, I see when I think of those two quotes is I see this need for us to go deep within ourselves, to find the wisdom from within, to live the life of intention, right? And when we do that, when we find the wisdom within, when we live the life of intention, our lives are no longer lives of quiet desperation. They become lives of intention. They become lives of choice. They become lives of, okay, who am I and who am I choosing to be and how am I going to act in this world and what is the role that I'm going to play? And to intentionally choose that and to live that with bravery, to live that with authenticity because it's aligned within ourselves, right? And it requires so much ridiculous amount of internal work in order to be able to peel away all these layers of social obligations and expectations and history and bias. I mean, look, I was biased about Christianity. I am 45 years old, and I think I've been to church like 3 times, maybe 4. And I don't think I remember one of them. I was very young. And I remember back in my 20s where, I was just so anti-religion as a monolith, right? That religion caused all the wars and religion caused all the heartache in the world. And in a lot of ways, 20-year-old me was not wrong, but 20-year-old me was also very narrow in her focus and her understanding of the way the world works, right? A lot of people need that support, that love, that community. They seek that within themselves. They feel unworthy, and they don't know how to help themselves feel worthy again. And so that's really what this work of personal examination is. It's peeling away all these layers of ways in which we feel unworthy, and then finding our worthiness within, finding our inherent worth and our inherent value, our inherent lovableness. And if we peel away all these layers and we find that worth and that value, then the world just becomes wide open to us. It becomes incredibly open to us. So I said something at the beginning of this, and I'm going to say it again, and I probably will say it every podcast because it just means so much to me. The best thing that we can do for another person is to work on ourselves. Because we all have these unconscious emotions, these unconscious triggers, these unconscious, traumas. We all have these unconscious biases about our worth, and then we project them onto other people. We have relationships in which we need somebody rather than relationships in which we want somebody. Because wanting someone versus needing someone is needing somebody to complete us. We feel incomplete within ourselves. We feel unworthy, and we need somebody to reflect back to us our own sense of worth, our own sense of value. But a relationship where we want to spend time with somebody means that we know that we are complete within ourselves, and that we just enjoy spending time with this other person, and that we learn more things about ourselves through that process of spending time with them. But we don't need them in order to feel secure within ourselves as inherently worthy and inherently valuable. And so this is the greatest act of compassion that we can have for the world. This is the greatest act of compassion that we can have for our fellow human, is to work on ourselves, right? To address our triggers, to find these unconscious emotions, and to make the unconscious conscious. And again, meditation can help with that, right? Quiet contemplation can help with that. Contemplative Christian prayer can help with that. There's all kinds of ways that we can make the unconscious conscious. But the point is to choose to do it, to go through the process, to do it with bravery and to do it with authenticity, and to keep going through that. And when we do that work on ourselves, when we really finally find who we are and who we're choosing to be, and we've peeled back all these layers of bias and societal expectations and our own personal bias against ourselves, and we see our inherent divinity and our inherent worth and our inherent value, our power, our sovereignty, then that's when we're ready to give that same gift to the world. That's when we're ready to, as a collective, decide what the human species is and what they stand for and they don't stand for. That's when we're ready, fully ready to say no more war. Because enough people have done that work on themselves that they can find the peace within. And they're not acting out of some place of ego and id. And when we've reached that mass of enough people not acting out of some place of ego, then the world shifts and the world changes in response to that. I mean, that's really how the universe works, right? And so that's really my message today. That's where I'm going with this. I hope you guys will hang out with me and continue on this journey with me. If it doesn't feel aligned with you, I totally understand, and I wish you nothing but love, truly. And I hope you do find what feels right to you. And if it does feel right to you, I hope we can continue to grow together. And I'm going to leave you with one final quote before I go and look at the comment section. And the quote is from Thomas Merton, and No Man is an Island. And I'm really, really loving this book. Again, I would recommend it highly. And he says, this discovery of Christ is never genuine if it is nothing but a flight from ourselves. On the contrary, it cannot be an escape. It must be a fulfillment. I cannot discover God in myself and myself in him unless I have the courage to face myself exactly as I am, with all my limitations, and to accept others as they are, with all of their limitations. The religious answer is not religious if it is not fully real. Evasion is the answer of superstition. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'll now go to the questions in the comments. And if you want to hang out, I'd love that. All right. Oh, Margot, you never thought of karma that way. Yeah. I mean, it's really, I see it as what we bring to ourselves, right? We bring it to ourselves by perseverating on something, by thinking about something and feeling terrible about something until we finally have something that allows us to be released and absolved of the guilt. At any point, I could have just gone downstairs and knocked on the door of the person whose car I scraped and said, hey, a couple of weeks ago I scraped your car and I'm sorry I didn't leave a note, but you know, I'm here now and you want $50, right? Because really their car was very beat up. But instead, I just kept perseverating about it, and I felt guiltier and guiltier and guiltier about it. And I didn't have the release until I manifested what happened to my own car. James asks, do you see karma as a form of consequence? Only a consequence from ourselves. I don't see an external being out there creating consequences and punishment. But I do think for ourselves that we seek ways of feeling better about things. We seek balance in our own lives. And sometimes we create the consequence that allows us to feel that. And then James says, it's a shame when the trappings and the rituals and so on obscures the message. Yeah, for sure, right? There's a lot of trappings and rituals in a lot of religions and a lot of spiritual traditions. And the ritual should serve the purpose of seeing the message rather than obscuring the message. But we get so caught up in wanting to, hit whatever goals we have in order to be loved by God, right? Or wanting to get so caught up in reaching some random state of spiritual enlightenment that we forget to realize the responsibility that we have to ourselves and the responsibility of what spiritual enlightenment would bring in the first place. I mean, it would bring unconditional love. And so we have to not just feel that for our fellow humans, we also have to act from a place of unconditional love for our fellow humans. So anyway, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate the comments, and I appreciate everyone listening. Love to you all. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.